Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our our study through the Gospels, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus, and we're doing this chronologically. And I want to start. Usually, I wait till the end to say this, but I'm going to say this now. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please go ahead and do so. We do these daily, and we're actually, we go a little bit deeper and deeper into the Word, and then later on, once we get done with the Gospels, we're going to go into a little bit deeper study into more theological type stuff, and even some daily issues type things we struggle with, that kind of stuff, and look at that. So if you find these interesting, if you find them helpful, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel. So today we look at the disciples arguing about who would be the greatest in the kingdom. And so um, this is while they're traveling, and I want to go from Mark's version with this one. I like the ways, and I'll hit Matthew and Luke a little bit here. But it says, Mark 9, verse 33 says, after they arrived at Capernaum and settled in a house, Jesus asked disciples, what were you discussing on the road? Well, out on the road. He already knew what he was doing. But they did not answer because they had been arguing about which of them was the greatest. So they were trying to figure out who was the greatest amongst them. He sat down, called the 12 disciples over to him, and said, whoever wants to be first must take last place and be the servant of everyone else. In Luke, right, in Luke's account, he tells them, anyone who welcomes a little child like this on my behalf welcomes me, and anyone who welcomes me also welcomes my Father who sent me. Whoever is the least among you is the greatest. And I like Matthew's as well. He says, so anyone who becomes as humble as little children is the greatest in the kingdom of So he's um, repeatedly tells us we need to become like children. We need to humble ourselves. If you want to be first, then you need to put yourself last. And this is hard for us. I mean, it's hard for me. I can tell you that right now. And so if we look at it kind of, there isn't a lot of verses here, but there's a lot in these verses that we can look at, and like he says in verse 3 of Matthew 18, he says, I tell you the truth, unless you turn from your sins and become like little children, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven. That's kind of scary because, a lot of us, it's hard. It's hard to do that. It's hard to do that. And so, if we go back and summarize this and we look at the note, right? The disciples, they've got caught up in the constant struggle for what we call personal success. And this is a common thing because, in America, especially for us Americans, right? We're pushed to strive and be the most successful and be the best, right? And be the top and all that stuff. And the one thing that we're going to find in the kingdom of heaven and God's kingdom and in the church is it should be the opposite of the world, right? Now, not that we shouldn't be ambitious in the church, not that we shouldn't strive for success in the church, but it's going to look a lot different than it does in the world. But then, unfortunately, in today, right, the world and the church look a lot alike when it comes to this type of setup. And well, I'll see what we talk about here in a minute. They were embarrassed to answer Jesus' question because they knew what they had been arguing about, and they knew deep down they shouldn't have been arguing about it or shouldn't have been trying to get to this. They knew. And so it's always kind of painful, right, when we compare our motives to Christ, right? When we sit down and say, okay, what would Christ want me to do? What am I been doing here? It's like, no, you don't need to be doing it. So, I mean, you can imagine Christ, you can imagine you doing something like that, and then Jesus sitting down and asking, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? And him, you have to answer him. It would be a little bit embarrassing. And so, like I said here, it's not wrong for believers to be ambitious, right? But when ambition pushes aside obedience and service, it becomes sinful, right? And so, what does that mean? What is it? Well, if if you end up, and I've seen this happen, if you end up, you know, you so want a position so bad, like, say you want to be in some sort of position in the church or something like that, you want to so bad, or even in the world, this doesn't have to just apply to the church, that you're willing to set aside, things or do things to get there, then, to be do sinful things to get there. Well, then you don't. Then obviously you're doing it for the wrong reason, and that's, we got to be careful. We got to be careful with that kind of stuff because it can be I mean, I've got caught up in it, right? It can be easy to do because in the end, you think, oh, the ends justify the means, right? It's like, oh, I know I did that, but we were able to do this, so it's okay that we. No, it's not. It's never okay to do that stuff. So we've got to be careful. And because we're all like the disciples and even the Pharisees, right? In that regard, I mean, you look at kind of the biggest issue that Jesus ran into with the Pharisees. A lot of it had to do with power and authority, and being the greatest, right? They wanted to be the greatest. They wanted to be the ones in charge, and so pride and insecurity can cause right us to overvalue position and prestige, and that's what we've got to realize and remember in the church, right? Because sometimes we get caught up in, like, we'll put the pastor or the minister and some of the elders and people like that, the preacher, whatever, whatever terminology you use, we'll put them up on pedestals, right? And then if you're in those positions, you end up putting yourself up on pedestals, and you start to think, oh, I'm this, and that's not how God imagined this, right? When He says if you want to be first, you've got to be last. That means you don't put yourself up; you're putting others up on the pedestal. And so we've got to make sure that we're careful in that. And that's the one thing we got to make sure is the only safe ambition, right? The safe ambition is directed toward Christ's kingdom, not our own advancement. If we're doing things just to advance ourselves, even in the church, right? If we're then the motives of wrong, right? If we're doing something just to promote ourselves or to advance ourselves, then that's wrong. And now I'm not saying, like, well, I feel like I've been called to become a preacher, so I'm going to go to school and do it. No, I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about if you're trying to do this infighting inside the church or inside of any organization, and you're trying to promote yourself and push yourself up, and you're willing to do whatever it takes to do that kind of stuff, that's not what God's talking about here. Right? Becoming like an elder or becoming a pastor or anything like that, it should always be focused on serving, right? It should be, I'm going to stay at the bottom, right? I'm here to be at the bottom and lift people up from the bottom. It's not, hey, look at me, I'm up here, and y'all should strive to get up here. But unfortunately, right? And again, I'm not trying to be negative when I say this. Unfortunately, that's the case in a lot of sense. It's, oh, I'm up here, I've got this position of authority, and so you need to be more like me, and you need to listen to me. And that's not the way. It's the opposite, right? God, this is what Jesus is telling us within this thing. It's just the opposite. It's like, no, you put yourself at the bottom, and you push people up. And so, we've got to renounce pride, right? And that those are Satan's tools. Pride and self-centeredness is Satan's tools. And so we've got to be careful of that, right? And so Jesus used a child to help them out, to help them understand. And it's not that we're to be childish. And we need to understand it's not that we're to be childish, right? The disciples were acting childish and arguing over who's going to be greatest, but we need to be childlike, with humble and sincere hearts, right? To be childlike, right? You know, to have that innocence that we see when we watch children, we see children. So, the disciples here had become so preoccupied with the organization of Jesus' earthly kingdom that they had lost sight of its divine purpose. They lost sight of what they were supposed to do. And we have to be careful not to do that in this case. And so instead of seeking places of service, right, where we should be looking to serve people, right? We should, they were seeking positions of advantage, things that would give them an advantage. And so we need to make sure we don't get caught up in that. It's easy to do. I mean, it's very easy to do. Yeah, it's human nature. I mean, if we look at it and we're honest, it's human nature. So we've got to make sure we don't lose the eternal perspective and compete for promotions or status or anything inside the church. And so it's very, very difficult to do this. And I understand. I understand. So we've just got to be careful and learn and remember that, what Jesus says about this. And so, again, that final message is to become like children, weak and dependent with no status or influence. And so, the overall message here is, this is just a couple verses, and we need to make sure we do not get caught up in trying to lift ourselves up or being the greatest or appearing to be the greatest of that, and that we need to humble ourselves. The idea is to humble ourselves and be like children in that sense, so that way, we're not trying to lift ourselves up, get caught up in pride. I mean, if you actually want to look at it, right? If you look at it, this, when we say this is the tool of Satan, this is what Satan's downfall was. If we go back and look at Satan's downfall, his downfall was because he thought he was better than he was, right? He thought he was as great as God, if not better, and that was his downfall because he wanted to be the greatest. And I've seen this. We've this stuff like this makes headlines because people in the church put themselves up in a position higher than they're supposed to be, or they think that they are, and it causes them to give into other things that they shouldn't. And so we just got to be very careful. And we can do this in our personal lives, right? It doesn't have to be just in a church organizational structure like that. We can do this in our own personal lives. Like, we can think we're great, right? We can think we're the best, and even from a spiritual standpoint. Like, this is where self-righteousness comes in. We become self-righteous and say, oh, we're better than these people because it's like, no. The only way to do this is Jesus did this, right? He's a perfect example. Jesus is the greatest, right? He's God, right? And he left heaven. He humbled himself. He came down and he put himself at the bottom to be the servant of all of humankind, right? And that's what we are to be. Right? Our goal is to find a place of service. How can we serve someone? And that looks different than how do I lead people, or how can I be an authority over people, right? That shouldn't be our goal. Our goal should be is what service, how can I serve people best? And find that and serve people. What you're good at, what your gift is, what you're able to serve people with best, and do that and focus on that. And then, the rewards come later. When we don't worry about it, we don't focus on that, the rewards come later. So again, just to summarize, right? Don't don't try to be the best at everything, right? Don't try to be the best Christian. Don't push. Humble yourself and admit that, hey, you know what? I'll never be good enough for what Jesus had to die for me. It's his blood that's covered my sins, not my own work or anything I do, right? And just humble yourself to be the servant, like, right? We talk about servant leadership all the time, to be the servant that Jesus was, and that's what we should strive for. Again, I appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch these. Like I said in the beginning, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please go ahead and do so. We'll continue to push out videos daily for now until we get to the end of this, and then we might change it up a little bit. But again, we're going to still continue to try to put out content on a regular basis. As always, I appreciate everyone for watching.